And part of it also, I think, is like the world has changed quite a bit with, just the fact that you can have a podcast and you can be on YouTube and you can do this and do that and you can build a network. Like there was a time where part of the reason why you didn't want to build an Avengers team is because at the end of the day, whether the church is 100 or 1,000 in terms of numbers, there's still only one Lord's Day and one pulpit, right? So if a guy wants to preach, there's still only 52 weeks in a year. And so, but now it's different. Like you're going to preach some at Refuge Church, but you can be sharing the pulpit with Brian. He's going to preach more. Dan might preach from time to time, but here's the deal. There are other platforms. There are other teaching opportunities outside of simply the Lord's Day homily. That's a game changer. And so my point is that like, it's not even, you said like one guy, maybe he, if he's a one-man show, he may not want to leave that because, there's probably prestige and notoriety and even money or whatever involved.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, because of the way that the world has changed in the providence of God with this great post-millennial hopeful eschatology, he doesn't necessarily even have to leave that, right? You moved to Ogden and you took Hardman Podcast with you. You're still doing it. And then you also, like you guys started another podcast with the King's Hall. So now you've got your solo podcast, then you've got your collaborative, work over here. And then Brian's doing the thing with his wife, and then, you and Dan have done a couple things together, and now you've got the high strangeness where the deacon, he gets his shot, and God bless him, Ben Garrett, and so, and it's awesome. It's glorious. And there's still only 52 weeks a year. There's only one pulpit. There's only one church. But it's like, okay, and podcasting is just one way of looking at it. But then it's like, okay, but let's take our podcast game from just, podcasting to what if we had a publishing arm? And it's legit. Let's do this new Christendom thing. And what if another guy, like his platform, it's not the Lord's Day sermon, but it's, what if he's teaching K through 12 classical education and training warriors for the next generation to slay giants and dragons, right? And so then boom, Kevin Love, so it like having that and what I'm getting at is this, I think pietism killed us. Thinking that the only thing that mattered was the church, and the only thing that really matters for a man is preaching, right? Like if you're not a preacher, then honestly, you should just trust in Jesus and die, because there's really no point of living, because preaching is the only glorious thing there is. And this all of Christ for all of life, like we're going to take back academia. We're going to take back the arts. We're going to take media. We're going to take medicine. Like my lay elder. So we're 2 years in, right? So like, I just want to say as a disclaimer, some people might be thinking Eric's saying some stuff and, but Joel's kind of like Right Response only has Joel, and is Joel one of the guys that Eric's talking about? Well, I'm like, Right Response is 2 years old. We hit our stride and launched in April of 2021, and also planted Covenant Bible Church, the church that I'm the pastor of, in April of 2021. So we're 26 months in. It's a new endeavor because I relocated from California. My theology was changing. I was moving, getting out of California, embracing post-millennial eschatology, all this kind of stuff. So it's a new endeavor. But even the one lay elder that I have right now, who is an awesome man, Connor Hensley, godly man, he's not sitting there hoping for a job at the church. And he's also not sitting there, praise God, hoping that, that I kill over or make some mistake so that he can take my job. And I know what that's like. Yeah. And that's what I was getting at earlier is trust comes from deep friendship. Yeah. It also comes, trust also comes by two guys both having their own meal and not having to share one. So it's like, if you're building a dream team, you don't want to do it with 23-year-old men who not only have they not achieved anything in ministry, but beyond just that, these guys, they haven't achieved anything in the work world at all. They literally don't know how to make money. So like they're looking to the church, not just because they feel a call towards vocational ministry, but their hope that like this is their only chance at even getting a job and providing for a family. That's like, if that's the lay of the land, the guys that you're looking at, those are not your three mighty men. They may be the disenchanted, the disgruntled guys who are in the cave, in that larger number of 120 men, right? Guys in debt. But the guy in debt is not the guy that you want on staff at the church. The guy in debt is not you, Dan, and Brian. You might have a few guys in debt who are members in good standing in the church, and you're working with them and you love them and they're growing and they're repenting and all these but that's not your Avenger team, right? And so my point is, one, it takes time. Like for us, we're 2 years in. It takes time for some, and I'm having conversations with guys who have achieved something in ministry. They wouldn't just be coming and hanging on to my coattails. They've got their thing and they'd be bringing it with them, and coming to be an associate pastor, even possibly a co-pastor situation, all those kinds of things. I think that's awesome, but you have to find the right guy. And I told you this offline because we've had conversations just in our friendship, and I picked your brain about this, but it's almost like a Venn diagram that I'm not even positive. These two circles, they either overlap so narrowly, like just the edges barely kiss, or they're just next to each other and don't overlap at all. And if that's the case, I'm going to be just heartbroken. I'm betting the house that they overlap and it's just a small overlap. But the two circles are as follows: the guy that I want to come and join Right Response and Covenant Bible Church, be my co-pastor, come on the network of Right Response, have a podcast, we collaborate. He's got his own thing, I've got my own thing. Boom, my first Avenger, and then so there's the guy I want. That's one circle. The other circle is the guy who will come. So a guy that I want, but then the guy who is willing to come. And again, I'm thinking if these two circles overlap, it's just barely, because there's guys that like I'm just going to say it. I'm going to say it publicly, and I know he won't mind because we're friends. He's on the board with Right Response. He knows I'm, but I have pleaded a couple times offline with A.D. Robles to come. and A.D. Robles would be awesome. He would be bringing his own thing, not just in the world of ministry with his own podcast, the A.D. Robles Show, those kinds of things. He'd be, and drawing more people to the church because he's got gravitas, all this. He's got experience, pastoral experience, all these. He's got courage. He's got spine, all those kind of. He could baptize babies for me. We can practice baptismal Catholicity, lowercase c, the whole 9 yards. Yeah. But not only does he have that, he also has his own business outside of ministry. He owns his own business. He sets his own schedule. He makes money. He's not a loser, is what I'm saying. By God's grace, he's not a loser. There's a whole bunch of guys that I could send out an email today and say, would you come and be my associate pastor? And they would. But that's because they haven't done anything. And then A.D. Robles is the one of the few guys that I want. And it's very unlikely he's going to come because he's content. He's content. So it really takes, now that's not to discourage myself. I feel like I'm discouraging myself, so I need to give myself, pop a quick white pill. I don't want to discourage myself or anybody else who's trying to do what you guys are doing in Ogden or what Doug did in Moscow or what I'm trying to do here in Georgetown, Texas. I think that it's God is sovereign and sometimes God has to make that happen. I think it's I think some guys need to catch this vision, this tribal vision. And I want to go back to you to talk more about that. Also, though, in God's providence, some guys will catch the vision, and so they'll even though they're content and they love where they are, and they'll be willing to pay the cost to move because they see the value, the high exponential value of joining forces. That's how some guys will move, because they'll see the value, they catch the vision. Other guys will move because they were so content and even seeing the benefits, they weren't willing to do it. But the Lord in his mercy will push them out. Not because they're losers, not because they can't succeed, but the Lord will orchestrate things in such a way to they're like, all right, like I'm almost like some guys, it's not that they lost. They will succeed themselves out of a job because they're so successful and so faithful and so courageous, they will be warmly asked to leave, or they'll see the writing on the wall that eventually they'll be warmly asked to leave. And so they'll go ahead and get ahead of it and just make the transition and boom, you'll get your first adventure like that. So anyways, yeah. What do you think about some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I agree with the pietism. Joe Boot has written about this. I've covered it. But churchianity, this concept that the only thing that we exist on earth to do is build the church. Well, then you're going to get, if you get high cap guys that go to the church, they're all competing for that number one spot, right? Because they're told that the only thing that's really valuable ultimately is being the head pastor. Well, that's a pretty truncated world. So then, okay, you say that's a problem. But then one of the other problems, quite honestly, a lot of churches don't attract high cap guys in the first place because the pastor is gay and the church is run by women. Yep. So in that scenario, they're kind of like, being a successful businessman is actually kind of seen as dirty. So you're like, well, I guess I'll just, kind of come to church and, hang out with my lodge buddies or whatever. And I'll spend most of my time on business with my business partners because these are the guys that are actually building culture. And so you just kind of stay away from the church. The church isn't really involved in any of those activities. So I think definitely that's why we're trying to reclaim a lot of the stuff that we do in our church and building our culture. It really does come down to, we have a lot of businessmen in the church. We encourage them. Yeah, go start that business. Go start that real estate investment company. Start the auto business, whatever. And then we have a lot of people who are actually investing in that too. Sometimes at small scale levels, sometimes not. But you need that so that a lot of high cap guys have owned space that they can play in the pasture in and around the church too, which is going to be your community because that's what we're trying to build. Going back though to the talent, this is something that we often miss. How many churches and how many people listening will have this experience where you say, well, we don't really have any qualified men, but here's what we do have, so let's just make it work. And then you, like you said, you start promoting guys to different positions and they're not really qualified for any of them. So now you've got, I think, probably in America, at least 50%, that's on the low end, at least 50% of churches in reform camps of unqualified or disqualified men in leadership. Well, that's going to be a huge problem in terms of attracting, retaining, and training other highly qualified men. But then go back to things like, okay, on the flip side of that, what if you did have qualified men? Think about the teams that win championships. So I was thinking about the Colorado Avalanche last year. They won the Stanley Cup, and it was kind of this funny post-cup hoisting interview. They asked the captain, Gabe Landeskog, they said, Gabe, how did you guys do it? How are other teams going to replicate the building that you did? And he goes, oh, it's really simple. He goes, just go find another Cale Makar, one of the greatest defensemen in NHL history. And he's like third-year player. And he's right. Jim Collins hits this in Good to Great. You have to get the right men on the bus. And so what I would say is this is the other piece of this. Behind every great team are great recruiters. There are a GM, or there's somebody, with the Bulls, you had the same thing with Jerry Krause. Like the guy worked tirelessly. I don't know how he did it. Look at the Dallas Cowboys in their heyday. What happened? They make a big trade and they get one draft and they've got like Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith, and Troy Aikman. Like, that's ridiculous. But why did they win? Because they had great talent. They had great people. They had the right people on the bus. So I would encourage guys too, spend a lot of time doing the networking thing. You're going to spend a lot of time and it's going to be fruitless. But ultimately, as you said, you have to believe that God is going to bring the right people to you. And then for the people, maybe there's people listening who say, maybe I would go join Right Response Ministries, but I don't know. Here's what I would also say. When I was making the decision to move to Ogden, Utah, I happened to be preaching like the past year through the book of Ruth. And so this had been on my mind. The book of Ruth, you have Naomi in the beginning. She's Mara. Call me bitter. Life is rough. There's been a famine in the land. And she says, what do you do? Your family's dead. You have like no prospects. What do you do in that scenario? Well, she turns her gaze and her eyes to the house of bread. And there in the house of bread in Bethlehem, God has lifted the famine. And so I was thinking about this and I was saying, we don't get to pick who's anointed. We don't get to pick the places and locations where God is blessing. What we do get to decide is how to respond to them.
Right.
So that was really one of the first things I did. I looked around and I said, where's God blessing? So we entertained Moscow and we entertained Ogden. Yep. And you could look at both situations and say, God is clearly, his hand of blessing is upon these places. Man, I wish it had happened at this other place where I was, but it wasn't there.
Right.
So I've got to go to one of the places where it is. And so that's what I would encourage a lot of people. Like, you can look at your ministry, your church, and you say, look, God is clearly doing something with Right Response and with Joel. And you say to yourself, well, if you don't have that where you are, find one of the places, go visit, go talk to the pastors. Maybe you're the right guy, maybe you're not. Maybe you're in the 120, maybe you're in the 3, the inner circle. Either way, you go where the blessing is.
All right, hold up. You're not going to want to miss this. I'm going to tell you exactly how our spring 2024 conference is going to go down. Here's the title of the conference: Blueprints for Christendom 2.0. Subtitle: 7 Doctrines for Ruling the World. We're going to have 7 primary sessions covering each of these doctrines for ruling the world righteously. Number 1, Reformed Confessionalism. That's going to be Pastor Doug Wilson preaching on that topic. Then we've got Covenant Theology with Pastor Brian Then we've got Biblical Patriarchy with Pastor Michael Foster. Then we've got Presuppositionalism with Dr. Joseph Boot. Then we've got Kuyperianism, All of Christ for All of Life, where we're going to welcome Pastor Doug Wilson back for a second session. Then we've got General Equity Theonomy. We're going to have Dr. Joseph Boot come and do a second session on that topic. And then lastly, we'll have Pastor Dale Partridge on postmillennial eschatology. In addition to these 7 sessions, we're also going to have not 1, but 2 live podcasts. On the first day of the conference, that's Friday, March 1st, we're going to have a live Theology Applied podcast. I'll be on the stage hosting the discussion with Douglas Wilson, Michael Foster, and Eric Kahn from It's Good to Be a Man. The topic is going to be all about biblical patriarchy. We're going to specifically be parsing out, distinguishing the biblical doctrinal differences between patriarchy and complementarianism. Again, that's Friday, March 1st, the first day of the conference, a live Theology Applied podcast on biblical patriarchy. Then we're going to have the next day, that's Saturday, March 2nd, a live Haunted Cosmos podcast. I'll be hosting this discussion with Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett. We're going to be talking about the Nephilim. We're going to be talking about the Watchers. We're going to be talking about what creatures currently are living underneath the surface of the earth and chasms of the deep. It's going to be wacky. It's going to be weird, but it will also be thoroughly biblical and incredibly unhinged. So you're not going to want to miss these 2 live podcasts: Theology Applied on Friday, March 1st, the first day of the conference, on biblical patriarchy with Doug Wilson, Michael Foster, Eric Kahn, and myself. And then the next day of the conference, Saturday, March 2nd, a live Haunted Cosmos podcast with Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett and myself on the Nephilim, the Watchers, and what lies under the surface of the earth. And then the conference will hold over for one final, the third and final day. That's going to be the Lord's Day, Sunday, March 3rd, where one of our speakers will be holding over to preach the Lord's Day sermon, and I'll be leading us in worship through the liturgy. So we've got 3 days, a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2024, Blueprints for Christendom 2.0, 7 Doctrines for Ruling the World. You're not going to want to miss this conference. Our early bird rate is still available, but only for a very short period of time. We are ending the early bird rate on August 31st at 11:59 p.m. That will be the final chance to get into this conference at an affordable, cheap rate. All right, so go and take advantage of the early bird rate right now by going to rightresponseconference.com. Again, that's rightresponseconference.com to register for Blueprints for Christendom 2.0, March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, 2024. Register today.